stop. This train keeps going.
It never stops. The train never stops.
Yeah. Body cams.
Okay, it's 5 after. We're going to get, this is a public safety committee meeting. It's a committee meeting with the police department. We have Councilors Carney, Bryn Lovejoy, Grinnell, Mike Green, Tim Rudd, Joe Driscoll are here at the moment, and we're here by the Chief Buckner and Chief Cecil. And Councilor Allen. What we're going to do to begin with here is we're going to ask the chief to give us an overview of where we are on, this is on body cameras, where we are on body cameras relative to purchasing, how many are equipped, where we're looking to go, or give us the whole gamut, and then we'll open it up to questions of to the councilors. And remember, folks, there's a sign-in sheet going around. If you could please sign in. Thank you.
Sure. So, okay. Sure. So the update to the body-worn camera program, we currently have 90 officers who are trained and outfitted with body cams. Those 90 officers are all uniform patrol. They're spread throughout the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd platoon, all the shifts of patrol. We also have 10 more officers that are in line to be trained and outfitted. Those are the CRT officers. The only holdup with that is we don't have docking stations for those body cams at this point. We never really intended to put out 90. We thought we were keeping some in storage so that we would have some in case they broke down. But these cameras don't break down as often, anywhere near as often as the ones we had prior to this in our first pilot. So we're just going to push them all out. So when those 10 are trained and outfitted, you'll have 100 officers on the street. Again, all uniformed officers. Axon's free trial, we're currently in the free trial period. That expires in July of this year. So we have not spent one dime other than personnel costs for the back end of this when we had to bring data in or develop evidence for a crime or something like that. But we've never paid one penny so far for the equipment itself. But that will expire in July of 2019. We've had ongoing discussions, obviously, about what we're going to do at that point, moving on to a paying contract with either Axon or one of the other companies, and those are ongoing talks. We'd like to, in those talks, we've talked about expanding the program to at least 150 officers when we go to the paying contract, and possibly 170 officers. What that would do is put a body cam on every single uniformed officer, including patrol, CRT, community policing, and traffic.
So let me just stop, and as you, I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm going to let you keep going. But when you say, are they assigned to them? Are they these are theirs? They take them with them, so I don't put it back in the rack and somebody gets it coming in the next shift. Is that correct?
They are assigned to them. If we didn't, it's kind of the only way you have to do that. Otherwise, the data itself would get very discombobulated if we had officers just take one, use it, put it back. So they are assigned to individual officers.
And how do we decide which out of what's the current staff count?
The current staff count of, how do we decide who to put them on?
How do you decide which 90 get assigned cameras and which ones
during the pilot program, the way we decided it, we went with reverse seniority. That was the fair way to do it. So if you were the youngest person on the department, you got one, and then it went up. But we also spread them out throughout shifts. So there's 30 on the day shift, 30 on 3 to 11, 30 on midnights. But on the individual shifts, we went by reverse seniority.
You can continue. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So we've had very few technical issues with these body cams, and keep in mind we've been fully deployed for about 3 months now. Prior to that, we were half deployed, and we did it incrementally. We've had only 9 technical issues with these body cams. They were all quickly resolved, so it's working very well. The district attorney's office is fully on board with this program. They've hired 2 video technicians to assist with caseloads. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes on the backside of this. One of the easiest things you can do with a body cam program is train the officer and slap it on him or her. It's the back, on the backside that costs money. It's the backside that will inevitably tie up resources because every one of these videos could technically be used for a crime or some type of incident, even if it's a civil issue. So the district attorney, again, has put on 2 people on his staff that are video technicians so that they can assist our team with these downloads. The SPD's body worn policy is on the city's, I don't know if it's on the city's website perhaps, but it's definitely on the SPD's website. Okay.
There's a link that says body camera, and you kick it and it's
Right.
there.
Yeah, if you go on the left side of the Syracuse Police Department's website, right on the left side, it's got its own link. It's got its own tab. Tack right on that. It's 21 pages long. Anyone gets to view that. I want to mention with policies, certainly with a policy that governs a nascent program like this one, and it is nascent for us. This is brand new for us. So any policy, but specifically this one, should never be looked at as above review, periodic review and amendments, and we will continue to do that. This is the policy as it stands right now, but it is going to continue to morph, in my opinion. We've had positive meetings with CRB. We had a positive meeting with the CRB last week when this was one of the topics that was discussed, and it was, and some of the recommendations that were discussed last week have already been implemented with regards to other issues. But with body-worn cameras, I think this will continue to be an issue or as a point of communication with the CRB, because I know they're looking to get this data to have it available for their reviews. But that's a discussion that's going to have to continue with legal, with the chief, with deputy mayor, and with the mayor. So at this point, the policy as is, but again, it could morph into different things and will probably morph. I will say that the officers are now being asked to be outfitted with these body cams. The officers with seniority that didn't get them are now asking for them. So it's not an issue with the officers anymore. I will tell you that when everywhere across the country, and I've mentioned this before, everywhere across the country, they've seen two things happen: use of force go down, and demeanor complaints go down. Now, we haven't been into this far enough to gauge that yet, but I grabbed data from our IAD division before I came over here, and both those items for the months January to March, the 3 months that we've been fully deployed with 90 body cams, if you compare that to that same time frame last year, both those items are actually down right now. Now, it's a very incremental decline, but they are down. So I think this program is going to be successful. If those two items alone go down, this is going to be a successful program. And I think that's kind of pretty much all I have. Oh, the retention schedules are right on there with the policy. We went with the New York State education law. They govern records retention. So you're going to see right on there that I think the shortest retention on there is 6 years. And then it goes up to 25 in life. So there's huge retention policy built right in there. It's an educational law. So if anyone's concerned about these videos going away at some point, 6 years is the minimal that they're going to be in there, and that's a long time.
So, yeah, could you speak?
You can tell you. Sure, if you want. I'm sorry.
Yes. One other note that it's not necessarily a part of this, but it will certainly be a piece that will be attached to it, is the necessity to likely increase our freedom of information folks. Because as we get into this from a criminal standpoint, when the public learns more about it, we expect that to significantly increase. And right now we have one person doing that, and that certainly will not be enough to have to support this kind of equipment.
Can that be a civilian?
It can be a civilian, yes.
Good, Chiefs, could you give us something on? You've outlined what you're doing now. Can you give us a little bit on the budget end? What you're looking at, how many you're looking at maybe doing? Can you expand the trial period so you can pick up more?
Like I said, it was a 1-year trial period. It ends July of this year. So if we move forward with Axon into a paid contract, the only contract that they do is a 5-year contract. Last year, when we sat down with them and talked to them about numbers, 150 cameras was approximately $1.2 million for a 5-year contract. I have no idea. My guess is with technology, the number's probably gone up by now, but probably not. 150 cameras, yep. So obviously. 1.2 million, correct. We currently have just over $700,000 in grants and aid that is sitting there, earmarked for a body cam program. How much did you say? Just over $700,000.
Okay, and along with that, I know when we wanted to install the cameras in here to live stream, the concern was retaining the video, maintaining. who's gonna keep it, how we're gonna do that. What is the cost of that to us, or is that going along with a couple people in the district attorney's office? Is the county going to be sort of handling that, or is that on our end, and how much is that gonna cost? And I understand that we're probably gonna have to add more for, foils and things like that, but are we prepared, to do it up with the staff that you currently have, or are you gonna also have to bring in, new individuals to actually, maintain that data?
As far as maintaining it, Counselor, if we go with Axon, it's built right into the contract. They use evidence.com. It gets streamed right up to the cloud. It's right in there, and they have a program where you can bring it out.
That's included.
Yeah, it's included in the price. Now, as far as personnel, likely we will have to hire more personnel if we go to 150, 170 cameras. I was down at a conference in Arizona, and the smallest body cam program division that they had down there was 5 people, 5 officers. They were sworn officers. You don't need sworn officers, but it was a division of 5 people. We currently have 2. And they don't just do this, they do a bunch of other things. The district attorney is, though, helping out with their 2 video technicians. They're definitely lending the hand with the backlog of pulling the data out for criminal cases and things like that.
So I have some questions about the procedure on the officer end, and specifically, I have several categories of questions, but
Okay.
one is about the automation or lack thereof of the activation. So the policy says that members will activate recording, preferably upon being dispatched. I'm interested that word "preferably" is there, whereas the rest of the document includes a directive of will, and why that language was chosen.
Sure. I think that particular language was chosen because we didn't want them, if they're getting dispatched to a hot call, it's man with a gun type thing. We didn't want them concentrating on doing that. We wanted them to do it when it was safe to do that. There also may be times where on their way to the call, keep this in mind, on the way to the call, there may be things that they may not want that thing activated if they're still on the phone, on the radio with the dispatcher, things like that. It might be a little bit too confusing for them to do that. I think that's the only reason that was put in there. We would like them, and when we did the training, our suggestion was as soon as you're dispatched, tap the thing and start it running. Most officers, I will tell you, from what we've seen from the data, are doing that because on the way there, they're picking. If it's a man with a gun on the way there, this camera may very well through the windshield pick up the suspect running away. So we are having to do that. That's certainly one of the things that probably should be an amendment.
Another question I have is related to the recording of internal police conversations, and I'm specifically thinking about an officer responding to a scene where there are other officers there and there's conversations that occur between or among them related to what's happening and what further police action may happen at that scene. And those conversations may well be important in some situation later on. So is this provision in the policy anticipating that the officers would turn that off for those conversations?
Here's the thing. My guess is this is going to continue to grow because we have on the back end of this, we can redact a lot of things. So we started with this, but I think we're going to broaden this out. In my opinion, in my recollection, the reason we put that in there was if an officer was, it's 21 pages, so I'll look through the specific one you're talking about. As far as officers' conversations, we were talking about them pulling alongside each other in their cars, talking about the chief, and not having to worry about having a personal conversation or getting on the phone.
Happens often.
Now, I want to hear those conversations too, of course, but I think that policy, that part needs clarification then, because I think that it's clearly important that those conversations that are happening between officers as they are about to respond in some fashion, that they continue to be recorded, and that we not encourage officers to turn off their cameras at that time.
And Counselor, I will tell you the easiest thing we can do, and maybe this is your next question, the easiest thing would be turn the thing on for your entire shift. Here's the reason why we can't do that. This thing has to tag each individual call so that we can pull this thing out. Otherwise, you'd have an 8-hour stream of video. And if someone says, we need to grab the video on that larceny that happened, so.
I hear you, but if you're at one call and you're having conversations with other officers or other folks at the scene, those should all be recorded, I'm imagining, and that policy doesn't really reflect that understanding.
Pertinent conversations.
Pertinent, yes, but I think that the ease of redacting later on, yes, if we're talking about lunch, on the scene, and then we continue, that's can be redacted later, but I don't want officers to be in the habit of turning on and off their cameras during an ongoing incident. Another question I have is related to the SWAT team not recording and what the rationale is behind that.
Here's the thing. I'm not a SWAT guy. I do have some background in it, but not. They were very concerned about tactical things getting out to the media. If you foil something and we for some reason can't stop that from getting out with the ways that we are able to stop a FOIL request, they may very well get some tactical information that we don't want them to have. So that's why that was the discussion when we were talking about that.
I think maybe we need some more exploration about how we could protect the tactical information better with code language or something else, because those are obviously situations that are most likely to trigger someone wanting to see that footage. So I think that maybe that could be tailored better.
Sure, you're right. They may very well want to see that incident. You're absolutely right, but they wouldn't necessarily need to know the tactical, what we were doing tactically.
Communication part of it.
Yeah. There's a portion that talks about their obligation or suggestion to officers wearing them that they inform others that they're wearing them. But there's not clarification on when that obligation attaches. Do we have a 10-minute conversation and then I say, oh, by the way, I'm wearing a camera? Or is that the very first thing upon initiating a conversation, by the way, I'm wearing recording?
What they're being trained, and if it's not in there, what they're being trained to do is as soon as they arrive on a call to mention to the individuals, whatever kind of call it is, unless it's unsafe to do so, that they're wearing a body cam and it is operating. It's recording.
Okay, so that's not in the policy, and if that is the policy that they're being trained on, it should probably be included as well. The recorded in error. Now, I certainly understand that there are times that folks are talking about what they're having for lunch, or they're inadvertently left on in a locker room or a bathroom. But my question is, for those incidents that are not genitals on the camera, right? Okay, one of your scenarios is in there. Why are we deleting any of these? If the storage is not an issue, if the cloud is covering all of this, why are we deleting any of these? Because at some point, someone's making a discretion call about what should be deleted.
Sure. Here's the reason, probably for that particular reason, and I know you're mentioning the locker room, or you walk into a bathroom and you accidentally tape something because it's still on. That came out of a conversation about privacy. And if that thing is still in there, in the cloud, and we haven't redacted and somehow gets out, attached to another video, then there's obviously a giant privacy issue. If it's and keep in mind, some video like that has absolutely no value to anyone. So
agreed. Is there a way you could tag it in a different area? Just because, again, there's no cost to keeping it, and it's a discretion issue.
We can look into it. Yep, sure.
I don't know. I have an issue with that as an officer.
Yeah.
Look, I get that we want to, the idea is that the individuals are protected as well, but an officer in the bathroom has a right to privacy. It shouldn't be tagged and kept.
She's not saying that. She's saying you shouldn't have the discretion to randomly delete things.
Yes.
Discretion, because it creates space for not genitals but other things.
All right. Well,
And the officer has the opportunity to turn off the camera, right? And mistakes happen.
I don't want to see their genitals anyway. Just like we want to see the other stuff.
yeah.
If I may, I just want to make sure that we're understanding, and the police department is working on this budget. All of this is going to take manual work, and it's going to take people to do that. So we're just, as we come back and say this is what the program is going to cost, it is because of the staff that's going to be. The other thing that the chief mentioned is that they do not have to be sworn officers, but among that group, the eye of a sworn officer is probably important as well in a mixture of staff that are reviewing the films.
I only have one more area that I wanted to address.
Okay.
One is that is in producing the tapes and related to redactions, and I want to know what method there's going to be to notate on the recording that the tape has been redacted.
Sure. Yeah, evidence.com has and we probably could present this to the council, but it has a very sharp, Axon must have police officers and other people on their staff, but they come up with these things that no other departments companies have, but it has a very good auditing program. And what happens, and I looked at it when we first got it, anyone who logs on, no matter what access they have, whether they have overall access or just access to their own videos, once they log on, it's an audit. Once they change something, it's an audit. Every time they go in there, and you can pull that audit up and see this person went in there 15 times and did just this. The original copy of that, without any redactions, without anything done to it, continues to stay in its pristine shape.
That's great. That answers my question about that. I just wanted to add another area where officers should be, I think, instructed to turn them off is administrative hearing rooms. That's not included in your list, and I think that should be added. Administrative hearings.
Okay.
Now, we also must realize that we're a union environment. So some of these things that may appear to be ABC 1, 2, 3 policy-wise also have to pass through that vein. And we're certainly in the infant stages of looking at this. So there were many changes that will occur before we get to the system that the city of Syracuse is comfortable with. I expect there will be some bumps and bruises along the way.
I have two questions. Council Hanson. My first question, going back to the cost, you said after July, the free trial is over, the free trial period is over. So you have $700,000 right now that you could use. So do you have a budget plan for the additional funding to reach the $1.2 million?
We don't.
You don't? Okay. Okay. But
What we're working on is what would our body cam department division budget look like? That's what has to be presented to the council for the next budget year.
and so ideally, the 1.2 million for the 5 years, that covers the equipment only. Are there additional costs with this?
Well, additional personnel that we talked about,
Okay.
that would be attached to that. And I can tell you that there are many agencies across the country that have started the body camera program and then had a going out of business sale because of these costs that agencies are not able to anticipate.
Yeah, that's one of my concerns, because I don't want to, I want the body cams, but I want to make sure that we have enough money to support it. Because if we have it and it's going well and we see a reduction in crime on both ends, I don't want to lose it because of the funding. So I just want to make sure that we can properly prepare for it and make sure that we have the funding.
It would absolutely have to be part of the operations of the police department moving forward.
Okay.
And we all would need to understand that it would cost.
Right.
But we would have to evaluate, do we believe it's worth that commitment? And I believe what we will see in evidence will say yes.
And I'm not aware of any data that says that it impacts crime. It does impact, as Joe said, use of force and complaints, but it also significantly increases transparency, specifically when you have those critical incidents on officer-involved shootings or critical incidents to where something that has ignited kind of tension in the community. To have that independent third witness is very, very valuable.
Okay, that's what excuse me for my, I shouldn't have used the word crime, but
Yeah.
You got the point. All right, so my second question, how do you determine when to look at the footage? Like, when do you guys, are there any stipulations of when you pull it and when it's viewed by the public, if so?
By the public or by the department? Okay, so by the department, it's going to be if someone needs it for civil case, criminal case, or we're looking to see if there's a training issue with officers, things like that.
Or
Those
administrative.
or administrative. And we also have the sergeants trained up, so each individual, most sergeants oversee about 8 to 10 officers. They have the ability to look at those 8 to 10 officers' videos. They're doing audits of those videos, random audits of those videos, just to check to make sure that the camera's being turned on, that there's no training issues, that there's no officer safety issues. So that's being done on a random but weekly basis as well. As far as the public, you'll have to answer that one, Chief. I don't know when we would send it. Certainly if the public wanted a video of something and it fit all the criteria where it wasn't part of an investigation, ongoing investigation, we didn't see any value in not in keeping it to ourselves, we would send it out to them. Most times, though, most times the media or the public want to see something that is very fresh and is an open investigation, and that's part of the evidence. So.
Yeah, I think we'd have to have a ruling from our corp counsel on that. I see she just went out.
Also, one more thing to consider, particularly on the civil side, as we look at cost overall to do this, and when there are civil inquiries for civil purposes or for accidents or insurance purposes, and really taking a look and evaluating the cost to us and whether that cost is passed on, because it's not a criminal case.
And two, for reviewing the footage, when you talked about the corporate counsel certainly advising us on that. Mr. Fitzpatrick's office will certainly be a part of it if it's a criminal investigation. But whatever language that we come up with in regards to that, I think that we need to leave ourselves some sort of wiggle room that allows us to prevent a Ferguson moment, meaning that the release of this video would provide a level of transparency to the public to see actually what happened, even though procedurally we may be in a place to where we historically wouldn't release it, but based upon what's going on outside in our community, it's in the best interest of everyone to see it. And I think that we should keep that sort of in our back pocket to be able to use that we don't get so strict that we say we would never do certain things.
I have a question just to follow up on what Deputy Mayor Owens said. Is there, I don't know if you can answer this or if law can, is there some precedent for that? I mean, I thought that FOIL was only, that you couldn't kind of surcharge on a FOIL request for some civil purpose, but is there some precedent for charging people extra when they're using it for some other?
I don't want to leave it off the table for a fuller discussion about what this program is going to cost us overall and the value, but for purposes for personal gain, possibly insurance purposes for an individual, I don't want to leave that discussion off the table. Law may give us a directive that says, no, it's not the case, but I absolutely want to include it in a conversation. The actual manpower and ability to manage this is going to be expensive.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. So first I would say, do we have a timeline when everyone will have them, and what does that look like?
Sure. Well, once we decide whether to go into a painting
Can I,
go
first
ahead.
of all, stop? What do you mean by everyone?
Every officer that's working patrol.
Okay.
No, more than patrol, because he already just demonstrated the patrol and the,
Uniform divisions.
all cops on the street.
So that's why I'm saying specifically you should say then 100, how many
Described
officers?
170 in his
We're
opening
talking
thing.
150 cameras. That's different
170, he
than.
said.
150 to 170.
Okay.
So go ahead. I guess you could be
in the
more
notes.
specific with the question.
What's the timeline in which everyone that we feel should have one will have one?
Well, the timeline is specified by the free trial period. I mean, it's gonna expire in July of 2019. So at that point, if we haven't signed a contract with Axon or gone with a different one, we have to send all that equipment back. So that's the timeline. We need to decide on something before then and move toward it. And that would be, and again, that with the talk is that it would be an expansion to 150 or 170, and that would cover all uniform patrol. And that, I don't know if that answered your question, but this thing expires in July, and then again, the equipment either goes back or stays with us as a paying contract. And I'm not saying we need to go with this company, but if we don't go with any company, we will not have anybody with them on.
I just want to follow up on Councilor Lovejoy Grinnell's earlier question about the language, which is, preferably to turn it on. How long does it take to activate it?
The camera?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just 2 taps and it's on.
Okay.
Just hit it. Yep.
So I guess I would just echo, her point then, that I think those kind of situations where it is an emergency are the most likely scenarios where we'd want to have that. And, arguably, if you're an officer that is, maybe likely to not do something by the book, you're the most likely person to not turn on your camera, right? So I would just echo her point about that.
No, that makes sense. And Counselor, just so you know, this thing, it's technically on all the time. It's just not recording. So even when you tap it, it goes back 30 seconds. It can actually go back 30 seconds to what was there.
Okay.
But it does have to be tapped to begin the recording. But you're absolutely correct. I think if we had, you're correct about that. We should look into that change in the policy.
And then my last question, Chief Buckner, you mentioned, obviously it's a union environment. Mm-hmm. Has the policy in other communities been something that's been negotiable, or what kind of role is that? How does that typically work?
Not the policy per se. We certainly don't want unions dictating policy for the police department. You've had some unions attempt to be paid to wear the equipment. That's a question that's been raised here. We're certainly going through all of that. It appears that our officers certainly understand the value of it. In my visit with the roll calls during my duty chief weekends. I polled some of the officers about their thoughts about it who are actually wearing it. And we've had a couple of recent complaints against officers to where they were cleared because the body camera footage showed that the information or accusation that was made against them was false. So they certainly see that if, to your point, if you're a cop doing what you're supposed to do, the camera is your friend. So we should all welcome having these cameras here. So I don't know what the union will say, but I know that from the chief's desk that we're certainly for the cameras.
Can I ask a question, Officer? And I'll let you go. Do you guys have any, so if the officer chooses not to, like deliberately not to turn the camera on, what do you do for discipline measures? Like what happens after that if you find out that they're purposely not turning them on?
There will be some level of progressive discipline that we will have for that. Obviously, there is a certain level of muscle memory that the officers will have to get in the routine of using the cameras. But certainly if we have a pattern of an officer to where it just appears that every time there's something kind of complaint or something against you, you just happen to not have your camera on, we will deal with those officers. And then the good thing about it, if everyone in uniform has them, we should be able to get camera footage from other officers who was there involved in the incident.
Okay, Counselor Rudd, but I'd like you to do what it says on the cup there. That was me.
Hi, I'm fine with these guys. It says hug it out.
Hug it out.
I'm a hugger, can I say? Greg Lowe, speaking to the mic. Speaking to the mic. Okay, so as the finance chair and as a member of the public safety group, I fully expect a proposal in the budget for 170 or whatever the number is for every officer to be there, because the budget just coincidentally goes July 1st, so let's do it. Let's pay for it. Let's figure out what the plan is, and let's have it be in the budget the way it should be. And from there, I went back. So we have this pilot with our cameras here. Mm-hmm. We just got cameras last year, and I went back to try to look at all the stuff that we've talked about cameras over the year, and definitely the tags are insufficient on our end. Like, you go to YouTube and it doesn't even say the date of these hearings or what gets discussed, or like searching for this stuff is really a nightmare. So our end, we need to look at how to do it better and make it accessible for people. We don't have all the privacy and contention issues that you all will have, so in theory it's a little easier. But when I went back, I can't even really tell what we have. So there were 3 items that we approved on the agenda last year for cameras. So one was for the 100 cameras that I believe we're using from Axon for the 1-year trial with the option to go in. And then that was in May. Then in June, we had this other one that said, it was with the U.S. Department of Justice, to purchase 200 body cameras in an amount not to exceed $300,000. So that one confused me.
That's one of the grants that I included.
That's one of the grants that we have sitting in the pile,
Correct.
ready to do. Okay. And then in August, we got New York State Attorney General money not to exceed $150,000 to purchase 31 body-worn cameras.
That's another grant.
So like the numbers confuse me though, because are they like flexible? Like the one is 150 for 31 cameras, the other is 300 for 200. Is the funding pretty flexible? That's what we're going to be using in our ask?
It's not, here's the thing, those grants may have been based on the VView camera that we had prior to this, and you bought the camera, you actually bought it. So those numbers are, that number now is just a pile of money waiting for us to sign a contract with
So
someone.
if you have a lower rate, you get more cameras.
It's very exciting to hear we have a pile of money to move forward. I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
My other question is, so you described, we have the 90 that are assigned and in use. Are they actually being used? Like, does the officer take it and then leave it in his car? Does he leave it at his desk? Does he always turn it on? What have we learned about compliance, about use in the pilot?
Sure.
And I would open it up to what have you learned overall in this pilot phase for us to do differently moving forward?
Sure. We would catch that during those audits. The sergeants would catch that, especially if an officer was doing just that, taking it out, turning it off, laying it on the seat. Those audits are done for that particular reason, so that we can catch officers that are not through, as the chief said, muscle memory forgetting, but just intentionally turning them off and not using them. And we would catch that.
Is the rate of use high?
Yeah.
Like, is it more than 50%? Is it like, are officers really using them all the time?
We have, we have 20, I got this from the technology division. We have, as of the 4th, March 4th, we have 21,177 uploads of video, and it's 5.5.
I don't know what that means, though, in terms of
It's a lot.
officers
They're using
actually
them.
turning it on. Does it mean that of the 90 assigned, that 40 of them are using it all the time, and we should be expecting even more than that?
No.
Because there's no measure. We don't have a data point to understand.
Councilman, that's why we built that audit thing in there, because, whenever you have any large body of, whether it's a corporation or a police department, you may find one or two people that are gonna try and get around something. So we have that audit program in there, and believe me, they would have already notified us if 40% of the officers were, 50% or 2% were not turning them on a regular basis. That's what the audit does. Beyond that, Axon does have a program now, they just developed, that does it automatically. There's an audit automatically that meshes with the CAD, which is the computer-aided dispatch system, and decides whether the video, the amount of video meshes with those calls that the officer is on, meaning when he goes out on them, he or she goes out on them, and when he or she clears on them, and it meshes with the amount of video. So there is a program. Now, there's a cost to that, but it does it automatically. Right now, we're doing it with physical bodies, sergeants doing random auditing.
Can you share the results of the audits with the public? If not, can you share it with the council? How do we, I don't understand. I haven't seen the audit. Did I not check the email? I don't understand the audit part.
The one we're currently doing?
Yeah, so it's underway, and then eventually, when will we, right, we have to make a decision now.
Sure.
About what to do, and I think we have to make decisions about what the obstacles are for the next year. So, yeah, when does the audit come out? Who will you share it with?
Well, Ken, I'm using the word audit because that's what they're doing. They're randomly going on, and just like a supervisor checks police reports to make sure they're writing them correctly, or checks any type of procedural thing with the officers that he or she supervises. Every week, they're deciding to randomly grab a couple videos and watch them to see if the officer's turning them on, if he or she's doing the right thing, if there's a training issue, a safety issue. So I'm using the word audit because that's what they're doing. Now, is there something I can share with you? I don't, other than that no one has come back to us yet and said this officer appears to be turning it off as soon as he gets out of the car and not using it, and then he turns it back on when he gets in the car. No one said that yet. It all appears as if they're using them, that we're getting the video, that they're using them properly, except for some muscle memory stuff that's going to take a little while. And the idea that it wasn't just anecdotal, we are hearing from officers now, senior officers that don't have them, that want them. So that would seem to indicate that officers are in fact going to be using them if it's something that they want. But I don't have any data to show you if that's.
So it'd be, I'm gonna really sort of dumb this down, because, I
Okay.
only went to a state school. Basically, we're doing like random drug tests, where you just sit there and go, okay, look at these 8, officers, we're gonna look at their videos today, and there's a sergeant that's doing that work?
Yes.
And saying, okay, they're doing the right thing, they're not doing the right thing. As far as everybody's pretty much following the policy, except for maybe a handful of situations where they may forget. Do we then follow up and make a note of Officer A, had a problem of forgetting to several times on a call to hit the button, and we're going to follow up with them to make sure that the next couple times that they're on a shift that we follow up and say, is this a recurring issue, and do we need to continue to follow them, or do we just simply keep saying, all right, we're going to take these 8, see how it goes, take these 8, see how it goes?
No. To answer your question is no. If he or she's done it a few times, the sergeant is going to meet with them and do the counseling thing, just like if they violated any other policy and procedure, and determine from them whether it was muscle memory or if they somehow a pattern that's occurring.
And then to sort of follow up on that, with having a uniformed officer review it, is that completely necessary, or is that hopefully one of those tasks that we can have if we add more individuals to some sort of, maintenance review, that they would be the ones that would actually go and do that work? Because I think, I don't want to speak for the rest of the council, but, I would assume that there are others that feel the same way that I do, that we'd hope to get some tasks and jobs that maybe don't necessarily have to be done by a uniformed officer, done by a non-uniform individual that, we just bring on, that's, they're based strictly on doing that, and we can get more officers out doing patrol.
As a whole, part of my initial assessment of the police department, is to try to convert as many positions as possible to where a badge and gun is not required to do the job to a civilian capacity.
Yeah, and just so you know, counselors, the sergeants that are reviewing these, they're doing it on their shift. There's no overtime involved in that. It's just because again, they supervise 8 to 10 officers, so during their shift, they're able to pull this video up and do these random
Yeah,
searches.
I
So
guess
it's-
just my only thing is, my question is more specifically, is this something that a civilian could actually do, or is it necessary to have?
I think that the meat and potatoes of it a civilian could do, but I certainly think that this is a position that you would certainly want law enforcement eyes as maybe a supervisor or an individual that's in the room that's a part of that issue, because there are just certain things that are just police stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the majority of the unit certainly could be civilians doing that job. But again, keep in mind of me even trying to do those conversions, it doesn't necessarily mean that the union's going to
Yeah.
support that.
Unfortunately, I don't envy you and your job, and I appreciate, I've heard you mention it a few times that you want to start doing that, and that's, I think, always been a common sense thing for me that we haven't done, and, you know, God bless you for doing it.
Counselor Rudd? Did you?
I did. I was foaming at the mouth.
Did you get an answer? Do you,
How
do you,
is
fo-
there?
do you,
Is
do you
there?
have that
Is there?
answer?
I'm going to ask a similar question in a different way. But is there resistance within the people who are supposed to have cameras to using it, that you know of?
Not that I know of.
I haven't felt that just in my short one of the folks feel like that.
Okay. I would say to the extent you're able to show data that the officers are using it, that would be great, because otherwise we rely on anecdote, and like I have an anecdote where I would say they aren't wearing them.
Right.
So like it requires the data for me to believe that they are.
Right. Yeah. You know, it's not something, it's not a difficult thing, really. We could just have the sergeants give us updates every week or so saying, I reviewed this many videos, and this is what I discovered, you know?
Chief, you said something about there is a system or that they have where they can report this back to, and it would take that off the.
Yeah.
I know that supervisors should always be reviewing these for different reasons, but what Counselor Rudd is talking about is just are they turning them on and off? That's a whole different
Yeah.
thing. So
That data
can you
yeah.
find out what that system costs? And-
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's a
part of
cost
it.
per camera, and I thought it was $29 per camera, but I'll get the exact cost, because it does, you know, in reference to Counselor Kearney's, it not only takes a police officer out of it, but it takes a civilian out of it. It's actually a computer program that's deciding to do these audits, and,
That measures the time of the beginning of the call, the time of the end of the call, and make sure that the amount of tape matches
exactly, yep,
the call, based on the CAV you said, right?
exactly.
Right.
And in terms of the data, like random sounds good, but I hope and maybe there's more to it, but I would assume there are basic checks that every officer should be passing that are like, it's issued, it's being used regularly, and then from there you can do like deeper dives into random assignments, and hopefully it's random in a way that covers lots of officers so that you're not going back to the same officers who happen to be using it, right? I mean, that's not to be a total cynic, but I'm just trying to make sure that they really are fully incorporated and being used.
Well, and that's what random means. I mean, they are going, this officer, and doing it completely random. One of the issues with the PBA was the fact that when we brought that audit up, was they were concerned that these sergeants would begin to headhunt. They would say, I don't like that officer, so I'm going to look at his videos 80% of the time, and these ones. So that's why we've made it completely random in the policy, and that would cover every single officer. You're not going to see any officer escape from that audit.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No.
Chief, just going back to your original point about just some incremental improvements in terms of decreasing complaints, to the extent that you're able to share that, I think that would be very valuable. Just, you know, for me, I think this is a positive thing for the city. I mean, I think you're increasing transparency and just kind of building that trust when you have this in place. So I'm very strongly in favor of it. And as we decide what to do going forward, I think that any kind of data we can have to support this would be, you know, instrumental. Because I do think it's, you know, difficult to put a price on having a trusting community, and I think that's something that we should be doing. But then also, I mean, you know, there have been some high-profile claims recently, and if these had been in place in that time, either the evidence from that would benefit the city, or the presence of the cameras might have changed behavior. So, I mean, I do think there is actually savings potentially to be had from going forward with this. So I guess getting back to my original point, to the extent that we have positive data, I think it'd be great to get it out there.
You bet. And I just wanted to mention too, because I probably danced around the timeline, even though the free trial expires in July. As far as timeline, it took us approximately 3 or 4 months to get up to full deployment with the training and the policy. The policy took us a tremendous amount of time. So when July rolls around, if we want to expand this to 150 or 170, we're not little kids about this anymore. We've got the policy. We know how to train, and we could roll officers through fairly quickly. I would say within a month, 2 months after July, if we went with Axon, we would be able to have all of those officers 150. 3 months at the max, because we really know how to do it now.
So, okay, Counselor.
Yeah, so just so I clarify, is 170 the target number?
170.
170 is the number of officers. If we wanted to camera everybody we needed to on the street that we want a camera on, the number would be 170?
I think it's 170.
Okay. And when you talk about the 2 staff the DA has and the back end costs with that, what exactly does that entail? They're pulling the footage. If you could just dig into that a little bit, what the 2 staff of the DA exactly what they do and why that's a big back end cost.
Sure. Keep in mind, so every one of these pieces of video could be attached to a criminal case or a civil case. So if the DA calls over, and even if it's just a larceny, and they say, we're taking this thing to grand jury, we need this video. Prior to them putting those 2 staff members on, we were doing it. We were pulling the video, we were redacting faces in case there were some privacy issues, and then we were sending that over. I want to keep in mind, it sounds like a quick procedure, at least it did to me, and then I learned the average, and this is from the experts around the country, the average, if you're going to look at 1 hour of video, it's going to take you 8 hours to go through that and do what you need to do if it's a major criminal case. So it's not as quick as just taking a look at it, blocking out a few faces and sending it over. There's a lot of time involved because you're looking at, think about.
Yeah, if you dig into that a little bit. Why do you need to redact faces?
Privacy issues. Someone's not involved in the criminal case and we're going to be. Yeah, and juveniles and things like that. So the 2 people over at the DA's office now have access to evidence.com and they're pulling their own videos and doing some of the redaction as well.
So the situation would be an officer goes into a house, there's juveniles in the house that aren't involved in the case at all. We have to edit the tape to make sure those faces are redacted from the file.
Yeah, most likely. And you're
That's the
going to,
type of
even if a
situation we're
video,
looking at.
yeah, sure.
And that's what takes the 8 hours for every hour of footage? Or what takes 8 hours to, why does it take 8 hours to observe 1 hour of footage?
Because, well, I shouldn't say just observe. It's not like watching TV. You're just placently watching TV. You have to keep stopping it, redacting, looking at it. So this is from, again, I didn't make this number up. This is from the experts around the country. The PDs and the body-worn camera experts are saying 1 hour. It takes about 8 hours to do what you need to do for a criminal
And keep
case.
in mind, too, even for redaction software that we were to purchase it as a part of the package, if I'm going to hand Councilwoman Allen redacted tape, our people still have to verify that the redaction did what it was supposed to do. Yeah. Because ultimately, we're still responsible for what we hand her. And if there's something in there that should not be in there,
so after that, you have to.
We're on the hook.
You have to watch it again, even after the
need
redaction, to make sure
you want to
that the
verify
redaction was done correctly.
Particularly on sensitive things.
Yeah.
And Counselor, First Deputy Chief gave you an example of potentially confined space, where we're redacting people's faces. Something happens out in the park.
In the park, yeah.
You have 100 people there who had nothing to do with the incident.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and even license plates. A lot of PDs are fuzzing out the license plate of a car that went by during a crime, and it had nothing to do with it because folks are going to have a problem if their plate
They're gonna
shows
say,
up.
I don't want my face or my car or my family's house. Why am I in your system? And you're keeping
right.
it for 6 years. You're going to get that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so so the plan is in July when we come forward, we're going to go for 170.
You'll have to
We are
ask.
going to go for the maximum amount, right?
That's my number.
Well, I just feel like it's
We're going to submit for that.
We're submitting a
We're
budget
submitting
that
for-
looks
we
at
will
170 and all the support that would be needed to deploy a body cam program.
yeah.
And then we're gonna look at that number and begin to
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. It just seemed the whole thing of doing part of the force just seems strange to me.
We're
you know what I
glad-
mean? Like
we're
we
glad to
might
hear
as
you
well
say
go-
that. Yes.
Might as well go for the whole thing. kind of
Absolutely.
attitude. And okay, and the last thing I was curious about. My last question would just be the union's assertion that police should be paid for wearing a camera. Is that a common practice? How many cities, I mean, does anybody in the room have anecdotal evidence of how many cities have implemented camera?
It's not common, but it's not unheard of. There have been some unions that have been successful in getting that.
Yeah, Rochester.
I would like to say I definitely raise an objection to that. I think it's rather ridiculous. I
So
don't
do we.
We agree with you.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I just
Yeah, just
But
Rochester.
it's not unheard of.
Yeah, it isn't. Rochester's,
Their argument would be that they're on duty the whole time that that's happening, and it's like with other things that are given by the police department, they make the argument that they're, on duty during this time, so I gotta be compensated for it. So.
what do you mean? They're on duty anyway, right? I mean, we're not filming them while they're going to the movies. I
yeah,
mean,
no, we're not. Listen,
I don't know,
listen.
other pieces of equipment, that's what the department, that's what's happened in the past with the union. The union has said with off-duty people that have had beepers, walkie-talkies,
Didn't the PBA in New York
In the
sue for this
past.
and lose? Didn't this recently happen? Pretty sure.
Yeah, it's,
with the body cam.
Yeah, they lost.
I still don't understand the thesis though. What they're
here's the thesis in a nutshell. Jeff knows that most of the people he represents now want them, but that doesn't mean he's not gonna try and get something for them.
Get some money for it.
No, I'm aware of that
That's
theory.
it.
My confusion is what the basis of the argument is. I understand why he would ask for more money, but I don't understand. You were saying so like
So
a
with
beeper or
the
like a-
pass with the pass thing is you're on call. If you're on call and then you get called, then you should be compensated. And there's arguments back and forth, but the arguments have prevailed in some cases where the PBA is won. Right?
We see it as a tool, a piece of equipment, and we don't pay you to carry any other piece of equipment. So that's our stance.
Yeah.
I think the PBA down in New York City, I think you're right, sued and did.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah, you're right. They got sued and got paid. They're getting paid
They
now,
get
correct?
paid, yeah.
Or they didn't?
I'm not sure.
I don't know. Well, I got that from Jeff, so it might not be accurate.
So we have, if
we have to run. Sorry.
no, we have, I said that I was gonna open this up to the public. We have some people here would
All
like
right,
to
yeah.
ask some questions. If the counselors have had theirs answered. If not, we'll continue.
Yeah, sure. If we're gonna, some of the questions were that I was gonna ask were related to other people here, so if they can,
Yes.
the CRB.
Anybody that
has
would
some
like to
questions
speak?
on their behalf, but I'd rather allow them to speak themselves if they choose to.
Ladies first.
Thanks.
Could you please introduce yourself and then,
Raynette
Right,
Relaford.
well-
I am the administrator for the Citizens Review Board for the City of Syracuse. Although the chief mentioned that we have had conversation, we would definitely like to put our concerns on the record. Some of them echo newly appointed Councilor Bryn Lovejoy with regard to Section 83.13 with regard to recording requirements and restrictions. That's the section that talks about shall not record. This section we also believe should be referred to the CRB's administrator's review of the members and any hearing in which an officer would attend, that it should not be recorded as well, which is not in the policy. There's several times in which the CRB is not mentioned in the policy, so when we're talking about revisions to the policy, we would like to state publicly that that needs to be added. One in particular, how will the CRB get access to the body-worn camera footage? Will it be provided to the CRB in the same manner as the booking videos and the evidence technician photos? It's not mentioned at all. And if that's not the case, we want to make sure that the CRB administrator, myself, gets trained in the department's approved training course, because that's what it states related to evidence.com, or be given access to evidence.com. Also, the CRB has recommended clean reporting in terms of the written reports be written by the officers prior to them reviewing the footage, which was not included in the policy. This is a nationally recommended best practice, and so we'd like to note that. Also, you mentioned that based upon IA's information for the last 3 months, that they noted that demeanor and excessive force had went down. I want to know if that's based on their internal cases that are received from the received at their office, or the CRB's cases that we send over, because we may have not received those. So we'd like to mention that. Also, you touched on a bit the criteria for which you are going to determine when the need for changes to this policy occur, but you didn't really mention it. But I'd like to make sure that we kind of hone down on when that is going to be and what the criteria really would be. Did you have any answers to any of those questions, or would you like to kind of table those to our next meeting?
We'd like for you to reduce those to writing, and we will be prepared.
Okay, I was told by Counselor Thompson that he did send those over to Deputy Chief Cecil
Yesterday, but just
prior
yesterday,
to, but I did want to make sure they were on public record, that those are the concerns that the CRB has with regard to the policy.
And I'm Peter McCarthy, Chair of the CRB. Just one clarification. Chief Cecil, I believe you said original tapes or recordings are always preserved. And that was one of our questions. Could you clarify that whatever's there, if in a future investigation becomes necessary to look back, the unredacted version is always still available?
Yeah, it's still available on evidence.com. Now, it's not going to be available after 6 years if it meets that criteria, but up until 6 years or whatever its retention period is, that pristine copy is never altered. It stays there in evidence.com. In fact, each one does it. A redaction here, and then they decide we need this redaction, this redaction, this redaction. That audit will show every one of those redactions, include each one of those will be a separate video.
Thank you.
The pristine one. Yep.
And last question I have, the 170 officers, you say all uniform patrol officers, that includes everybody on the street with the exception of SWAT, like Lieutenant Turos, Drug and Gun Squad, they are considered uniformed, are they covered, for example?
He's in the CRT, that unit was mentioned.
So they're considered uniformed and they'll have cameras?
That's correct.
Thank you. So it's basically everybody except SWAT?
No, sir.
Thank you.
It's the units that we said: uniform patrol, traffic, CRT, the COP officers. I think that was.
Yeah,
that was it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good afternoon. Yusuf Dukadir, NYCLU. Chief, it's my first, I was on paternity leave when you were gone, so it's my first time to actually get to meet you, so welcome to Syracuse. And, we've been eager to have a discussion, so I'm looking forward to the opportunity to do so. And I really appreciate the robust conversation that we're having about this issue. I think it's really important to give credit when credit is due, and I think it's really important to acknowledge the fact that there were some really good questions that were asked, and I appreciate the transparency that was brought out. This is exactly what the type of direction our community needs to go in, and so I want to be fair and reasonable in expressing the appreciation. Last time I saw you, Chief, I had like a 1-month-old, and it was talking about the launch of the program, and I am a little concerned about, I appreciate that the policy is publicly accessible. I think at the time when we spoke, and Syracuse.com, whoever recorded it, so we can look back, it wasn't recorded on a body camera, so we can't go to evidence.com. But there was a kind of commitment that there would be a more robust kind of community discussion around the policy, so that some of these issues are weeded through. And I want to bring us back a little bit. And kind of center us in why this is such an important issue, why it's so imperative that we have a really strong, solid policy and really strong use of body cameras. A lot of those issues were talked about and brought about here, but we had a police-involved killing several years ago, and I think this is probably the first Public Safety Committee meeting that we've had since then, which we probably should have more, and at a time where people who have concerns can kind of get to. But again, I've also been gone for 4 months, so that might be a part of it. But a part of the challenge that existed in that moment was the discrepancy between what the public felt and what was talked about publicly, and the divisions in the reduction of trust with the department, which is really essential for important police investigatory options and ability. And so if you don't have a strong, robust policy that the community has bought into, you don't have the ability to be able to have as robust a response to concerns about combating crime, as probably you know more so than I do. So I want to flag that as a important piece that needs to happen. The community needs to be brought back in and updated and engaged, and I think this is a first conversation, but there should be more. The more conversations you can have, as perhaps adversarial as they may be, the better it is to reduce, to your point, Chief, the Ferguson moment that may happen, because we now built a relationship and now we can trust one another. I want to bring about the necessity and the essential value that there is in working closely with the Citizens Review Board, and why it is, I don't want to say just an asset, but it is invaluable and essential, because the Citizens Review Board in many respects becomes a proxy for the public's trust in the department, particularly because body cameras are a proxy for people's ideas of accountability and transparency. And you can't begin to deal with accountability issues if the Citizens Review Board has limitations in their ability to do what the ordinance affords them the right to do. This has been litigated, right? And so we do know out of New York City, which is the largest police department in the country, where they did try to litigate to reduce some of these options. And in fact, we do know that the courts have said, I think as of 2 weeks ago, that actually this information should be shared in that type of way. And so there's already a legal precedent that establishes this. It's already gone to federal court, and this is not something that we should be debating any further. I think it's really important that we just do the work of working with the CRB, who is really doing the job of elevating the conversations in the community so that we can rebuild the trust that really has been lost for a long time. And the last point that I want to bring, and I think Counselor Lovejoy Grinnell did a really good job. She's an attorney. So she did a good job at kind of going through a number of the concerns that I had and that we have as an organization. But I want to bring us back to a point about the PBA. I think it was a kind of joke where you said they don't drive policy, but ironically in the entire conversation, the thing that was referenced probably more so than policy was the PBA. And I think that's a problem. You are the chief, as you know, and you are the deputy chief, and you are all very capable and skilled at what you do. You understand the concerns and the issues that the community is dealing with. And I get the job of the union to get more stuff for their folks, and they may have also some legitimate concerns, but you don't do best practices in that way. You don't drive better policy in that way. And there are national standards and national best practices that if you don't have access to, we can certainly try to facilitate in collaborating with you to get those best practices. PERF, as you probably are aware of, is part of what the police chief search process that the city engaged, has a lot of best model policies that can be looked at. And this issue is not something that's overly difficult because it's really been done across the country in a robust way, and we know what works and we know what doesn't work. On the point about what doesn't work, I am deeply concerned, as the CRB administrator stressed, as a best practice that should be employed under this policy, is the ability for officers to review footage before they write their report. That's not a best practice under most departments, and it shouldn't be here because it allows the officer who may be a bad actor to cover up some of their behavior, and that's not what I think is the objective of the policy. And the more ways that we can reduce the public's trust, the more incidences that we have where people begin to not want to engage with the department, and the more liability of the city and the council has to then mitigate and address, because we do have $1 million lawsuits for a city that's a few $1 million in deficit. And I think it's really important that we begin to look at the costs to the city and to our ability to be financially solvent when we're spending, in one case, $2 million, in another case, $1 million, in another case, several million, for issues that really shouldn't happen and that are not acceptable from a professional standards level. Police officers are professionals, they're highly trained, the public gives a lot of trust in them. We believe in what they're trying to do and making sure that we are safe in our communities, and it's important that we elevate the level of the standards that we hold them accountable to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Just before we move on, I'd just like to echo the question I was going to ask was the remark that CRB, Renette, and Yusuf touched on about clean reporting. I definitely, from my perspective on the council, I would like to just echo their sentiment and say I'd like to see that practice incorporated into the policy as well.
If there are no other questions, I want to thank everybody for attending. If you have anything, Renette, you got yours in writing, so that's all set. But if anybody else has anything else they'd like to submit in writing, we'll accept it. Otherwise, that concludes the committee meeting. And thank you very much, Chief and Chief. Thank you.
I'd like to express our gratitude to both